thinking better and thinking together about life's most important issues. A place to finally meet in the middle, to think freely and reasonably about the big questions of life. This is Thinker Sensitive. Welcome to another episode of Thinker Sensitive. I am Ryan Ragazine, and I am honored to be your host. As a reminder, for a period of time, I'm going to be releasing new episodes every other week instead of every week. I'm going to be doing this in order to optimize and maximize my older content for newer audiences. But I want to make sure that I'm releasing new content for all of those who have been faithfully listening to this podcast from the very beginning. With that in mind, today's episode is entitled The Way of Contentment. The critically acclaimed film Nomadland, winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture in 2020, tells the inspiring story of a woman in her 60s named Fern who decides to travel around the American West after losing nearly everything in the Great Recession of 2007. Living out of her van as a modern-day nomad, away from the complications, demands, and stresses of conventional society, Fern travels from town to town, state to state, and site to site, visiting national parks, taking in natural wonders, and enjoying the beauty of nature. The Great American West is a wondrous place, and the majesty of it all is certainly not lost on Fern. During this new season in her life, Fern finds peace and fulfillment in a simple way of living, in the nomadic way of life. She might not have much by worldly standards, but she has found contentment, and that is priceless, something that money simply cannot buy. Fern's way of living isn't entirely different from those who invest the bulk of their money in travel and experiences. Those who buy tiny homes or who own RVs and journey across the country. This is a unique way of living, a life off the grid in some ways, away from the hustle and bustle of modern experience, the expectations and ambitions of modern man, and the feelings of discontentment that so often follow from these things. Reflecting on the history of the human race and the human condition, the French Enlightenment philosopher Rousseau had a theory that natural man, or nomadic man, the hunter and gatherer type, was happier than civilized man. He believed this based on a combination of different factors, like perspective, degree of knowledge, expectations, perceived needs, and desires. Rousseau hypothesized that human beings before the formation of civilizations were at peace, fulfilled, and content. In some ways, this is because they didn't know any better. Rousseau imagined that the first humans and the first people groups didn't have anyone better or anything better with which to compare themselves. And this greatly minimized their desires and neutralized their ambitions. There were no Joneses to keep up with. There was no socioeconomic ladder to climb. For Rousseau, nomadic man had a very pure, realistic, and true to form understanding of actual needs. All that was needed was water, food, and a place to rest one's head. And what was needed These truly basic human needs was all that one really wanted. In other words, the first humans didn't desire what they didn't truly need. Rousseau believed that this simple and humble way of life, this life without unnecessary ambitions, without exorbitant desires, without an inflated sense of what one really needs, was a life of tranquility and satisfaction, a life of fulfillment and happiness. I suppose one could sum this up by saying that for Rousseau, happiness, at least in part, is a matter of perspective. Many people living in third world countries today serve as a good example of Rousseau's theory. When I was in my early 20s, I took a trip to Nicaragua to visit friends and missionaries there. If you don't know anything about Nicaragua, it's the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, behind only Haiti. My missionary friends took me to a mass garbage dump where people lived and even ate, scrounging for food through the endless heaps of trash. A place of refuse had become a place of refuge for so many. I remember very vividly watching kids run around and play in this vast landfill, laughing and giggling with bright smiles on their faces, smiles that could light up city skylines, cities dripping with modern luxuries, ease, convenience, decadence. I remember taking a few pictures with some of the children in the dump and wondering whether it was right for me to smile in the shot. How could I be happy for these kids? How could I respond to their plight with a smile? But these children didn't know any better. And as much as they were stricken and cursed, there was also a blessing in this. A peace, a contentment, and even a happiness that surpassed all understanding. Something that many people in modern Western societies don't have, even though they have so much. On today's podcast, I want to reflect on Rousseau's theory for a bit. And I want to take some time to evaluate the current state of civilized men and women, to assess the condition of the modern human being. Unlike Rousseau's portrayal of the natural or nomadic man, the civilized or modern person is usually extremely driven and highly ambitious, even competitive. She is constantly comparing herself to others, trying to keep up with the Joneses, climb the socioeconomic ladder, and scratch and claw her way to the top. She knows too much. She is acutely aware of what she doesn't have, and she won't rest until she gets it. She confuses needs with wants, always thinking that she needs what she wants, always wanting so much more than she actually needs, always wanting what she doesn't have. The modern and civilized person is a jealous, envious, and greedy person. His appetite is never full, his desires never satiated. He lives in a perpetual state of discontentment, never at rest, never at peace, never satisfied. Though he is filthy rich relative to global standards, though he lives in decadence and excess, though he has an abundance of resources, though he is surrounded by one convenience after another, though he has never experienced true hunger and true thirst, though in comparison to all other eras in human history, he is blessed beyond belief with luxuries and amenities unprecedented in the history of humankind, he is never content, never fulfilled, and never truly happy. One has to be a pretty damn ungrateful, spoiled, and entitled brat to be a modern, civilized person. And aren't we all? Aren't you? Aren't I? And yet, with all the conveniences that we're surrounded with, and the abundance of resources and riches that we possess, we might be the most discontent generation of all. In spite of immense blessing, the 21st century person might be the most unhappy person to have ever lived. If there's some truth in Rousseau's hypothesis, then this actually makes perfect sense. I know there's no way to measure this or quantify this, but I wonder if this generation is the most anxious and depressed generation of all time. Just look at how prevalent mental illness is today. Look at the amount of people on anxiety medication and antidepressants. And I'm one of them. I wonder if mental illness is as severe in various impoverished countries as it is in wealthy countries like the US. Are anxiety and depression first world problems? I'm not sure. But maybe. The higher the expectations, the greater the potential. The more aware one is of alternative possibilities, the more robust and expansive our definition of needs is. The more ambitious we are, the more lustful, the more greedy, the more envious, the more jealous, the more spoiled we are. The more discontent and unsatisfied we become. Maybe in some way, the more blessed I am, the more cursed I am. Before I close with some personal recommendations and words of encouragement, I want to qualify some of my comments here. It's not my intention at all to downplay the plight of the impoverished, or to diminish the immense pain and suffering that poverty causes. As I've said, I've seen it firsthand. But I've also seen firsthand the surprising, almost miraculous joy, peace, and contentment that is found in these troubling situations and settings. And I think a lot of this has to do with perspective. Of course, just because those who may seem cursed may actually be blessed in some ways, doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue with great vigor the end of global poverty. Ideally, one can live somewhat comfortably without concerns of finding clean water or worries of where the next meal is going to come from, while also living a happy and fulfilled life at the same time. The trick is being able to find peace and contentment in every stage and in any circumstance of life. But that's easier said than done. Let's close today's podcast with some personal recommendations. First, if you compare yourself to others, don't just compare yourself to those who have it better than you. Compare yourself also to those who have it way worse. And the reality is that there are far more people who have it worse than you than there are people who have it better than you. In life, there will always be people who have it better, but there will also always be people who have it much worse. Second, as I've mentioned before, many of us lack a proper historical and global perspective. If you live in the United States, chances are that you're in the top 10% or top 5% globally. If you live in the United States in the 21st century, chances are you're in the top 1% historically. Third, don't confuse wants with needs. We might want a lot of things, but when it comes down to it, we don't actually need a lot of things. Need is a strong word. I need water. I need food. I need a place to rest my head. I don't need a Porsche or a mansion or a vacation home or a hot tub, though that would be pretty awesome. I'm a big fan of hot tubs. Fourth, pursue peace, contentment, fulfillment, and joy over possessions, resources, and riches. We all know the saying, money can't buy happiness. But I'm not sure many of us actually believe this. Until we become wealthy ourselves, and then we find out that it's true. The same can be said for popularity or fame. How many famous people have to tell us, whether through their words or through their deeds, including the act of attempted suicide, that fame doesn't bring happiness until we actually believe this? Fifth, strive to be content with what you have. Make it a goal in your life, a discipline in your life, to make the most of what you've been given. Instead of focusing on what you don't have and focusing on what others do have, maximize what you have. Strive to squeeze all the goodness, all the pleasure, all the joy out of the things that you've been given. Those who are constantly wanting what they don't have are never able to enjoy what they do have. And thus, they're never able to enjoy anything. Don't make the mistake of taking the things that you've been given for granted. Sixth, exercise the virtue of gratitude in your life. Be grateful for what you have. Thank God for what He has graciously given you. Finally, I would encourage everyone to take a trip to a third world country at some point in your life. The perspective that it provides is invaluable. When I'm feeling envious or covetous, or when I find myself complaining about my lot in life and my position in society, or when I'm feeling disappointed or something bad happens in my life, I often think back to my time in Nicaragua, what I saw, what I experienced. It grounds me in a way. It gives me much needed perspective. I'm lamenting about such and such, some penultimate first world problem, while people in Latin America are literally picking through a mass garbage dump for something to eat. Christ have mercy. Traveling to a third world country can be a life-changing experience, a formative experience. It can certainly help us to be more content with what we have. Thanks for listening. This episode, and all episodes of Thinker Sensitive, are available on thinkersensitive.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app today to listen to more thought-provoking content from Thinker Sensitive.